I'd like to know about what are some of the biggest misconceptions and common pitfalls that organizations face when they're trying to implement structured frameworks like OKRs.
Number one on my list is too many OKRs. I love this story. I had this one client that said, we're going to use OKRs. I'm like, okay, why do you want to use OKRs? What is the problem you're trying to solve? We don't focus very well. We just have too many things going on. There's new things coming in. People are overwhelmed. Okay, well, let me see your OKRs. Thousands of OKRs. So I'm sitting here going, well, okay, isn't it ironic that you're telling me you want to use OKRs to focus, and yet you have thousands of OKRs? And like, yeah, we were kind of thinking that too. And I said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to try something new. We're going to have one. And it's really interesting.
Goal-setting frameworks are designed to drive clarity, alignment, and success. They help leaders set ambitious targets, track progress, and keep their teams focused. But what if the way they're implemented is actually holding them back? Could common pitfalls be preventing teams from achieving their fullest potential? That's exactly what we're going to explore today. Joining me in this episode is Ben Lamorte, founder and president of OKRs.com. This is the leading expert in objectives and key results, OKRs. Ben's worked with organizations around the world to refine goal-setting strategies, and today we're very lucky to have him here discussing what makes goal-setting frameworks effective. As well, we're going to talk about what can go wrong and how AEC professionals can drive real impact with structured goal settings. I'm your host, Rebecca Swaby, and this is the AEC Leadership Podcast. Let's jump right in. Ben, so great to have you here today. Can you start by telling our listeners a bit about yourself, how your career led you to helping organizations implement structured goal setting, and what inspired you to launch OKRs.com?
Well, quick story is I started out in mechanical engineering, got a job in management consulting, and what that meant was, here's a spreadsheet, go build spreadsheets, because they figured you're an engineering guy, and it kind of was true. But fast forward, I built financial models, but fast forward, 20 years? And one day I had a mentor, and I highly recommend you get a mentor. If you don't have one, I don't really know how to get a mentor. My story, boy, we could have a whole podcast on how I ended up getting my mentor. It's quite a funny story. But it ended up being the father of one of my high school students. We'll just leave it at that. Okay. Anyway, he happened to be the founder of Oracle Applications. So he's a bigwig. And he ended up joining the board of my company, which was a software company. We were about 30 people. And it was around 2008. And you can imagine the companies were not doing so well. I think our sales team was starting to ramp up. And then it was 2008. So we had to slow down a little bit. And I was at that existential crisis of, do I keep doing this job or do I find another job? Fine print, keep this job, because there was no other job. And my advisor, this guy, his name was Jeff Walker, and he was the founder of Oracle Applications, if I didn't already mention that.
Yeah,
he had used
amazing.
OKRs. Okay, I'm fast forwarding now to he had used OKRs at Oracle. And if you can't tell, I sort of talk all over the place, right? So I was in the leadership meeting and I was talking all over the place. And I think I was sort of famously known for the guy that half of what I said was brilliant and half of what I said was just, not relevant at all. And the challenge was to figure out which half was which. And so my advisor, Jeff Walker, after one of our calls where I gave the update when it was my turn. And I was, the webinars are coming up. We've got our sales team operating on all cylinders, and I just started spouting out all these random facts. And Jeff, after that call, I'll never forget this. This was the turning point in my career, right? He said, Ben, let me ask you a question. When you go on a hike, do you have a destination? And at the time I had a small daughter. So I would say, I have we go up and we look for waterfalls, or, we sort of have a place we park. We sort of have a destination, but why do you ask? Now I knew Jeff, he was sort of like a Yoda. Not to say that I was Luke, but let's think of him more like a Yoda. I won't go as far as say that I was Luke. But he said, Ben, when I ask you a question like that about your family life, I'm happy to hear about your daughters, the waterfall, all of that. But at work, do you realize the way you gave your update? You wasted your time, you wasted my time, you wasted everybody else's time. He went Oracle on me. I won't repeat it here. But he was a good coach. So he said, Ben, here's what you could have done. You could have started with the destination. You could have said, here's where we want to be. And then you would have paused, said, here's why, right? So this is why we want to get there. This is why we want to move in this direction. This is our destination. Here's why. And then you would tell me, here's how we'll know we got there. Those I later found out were the key results. How do you measure your progress against that objective? And then you can tell me all these things you're doing and if the webinar is filling up or whatever. In that context, this was the turning point, because prior to that, I was always told I was in the weeds. I was building those spreadsheets. I had all these the figures and numbers and models and all this stuff. but I couldn't see the big picture. So I was talking like that, as opposed to here's the objective, pause. Here's why it's important. Here are the key results. Here's the measure. And so I started doing the Jeff Walker coaching thing that he did on me. I started doing that on other people. And it was the first time that I got feedback that these conversations I was having, were incredibly valuable, as opposed to just getting numbers from people to put them in my spreadsheet models.
Oh, that's amazing. And it makes so much sense too, because, when you are in the weeds, it's really hard to forget about all the details that are spinning around in your head. And everything seems important. Everything comes out all at once. But for the listener, for the person that you're trying to, convey a message to, it's a whole lot of nothing soup sometimes.
Well, you just gave me a idea of what happened one time when I was doing OKRs coaching a little bit more, just to illustrate one point. And this will probably illustrate a couple points. But here I was into this office with this 20-something HR director, and she was fairly new, and she was totally overwhelmed. And she was like, and I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute. What's the objective for HR? And she's like, well, we have all these, all the CEOs and the CFOs and all these people, the VPs, they're all wanting to streamline the onboarding because it's just, and I said, well, really? Well, why? Well, because it takes too many, they're complaining. The new people that are onboarding are complaining. They're just saying I'm doing it wrong. It's taking too long. I'm like, okay, slow down. So the let's use the objective, streamline the onboarding. She's like, yes, that's what I want. Why is it important? We can't just say people are mad, but we can say it's wasting people's time. We can say that we're getting a lot of complaints, sure. But also new employees feel like it's not integrated or whatever. We can make some bullet points, okay? So how would we improve it? And she's like, look, I got to update these training decks. I mean, for onboarding, I got to schedule these meetings. And it was interesting because, like you said, when you're in the weeds, see, she was in the weeds. She was like, I got to do all these things. I'm now becoming Jeff Walker, right? So I'm sitting here going, wait, okay, hold on. I know you need to do all those things, but how are we going to know if you've streamlined onboarding? Not what are you going to do to streamline onboarding, but how will we know? If I were to talk to the CEO and say we've streamlined onboarding, and here's how we know, there's a measurable statement. And she was like, wow, I never really thought about that.
How do we know
it was
it's
really
done?
interesting. Yeah. She was like, how do I know we've really made progress? I don't know. I just have all the stuff I need to do. And we ended up sort of after about half an hour or so, it was reduce the number of onboarding meetings for a new hire from 5 to 2, because we figured out there was like a technical and a business and we could lump them together. So that was like this huge breakthrough because they didn't want to they didn't know. Like, I'm a new employee. I'm on onboarding meeting number 4. Wait, did I do onboarding meeting number 3? It was too confusing. So we would reduce the number of meetings, streamline onboarding, and she was like, oh my God, that's totally good. And then it was reduce the total number of hours spent, I think, by leadership from whatever to whatever per month or something. And so what happened was, once she had those key results, she's like, Ben, I got to leave. I'm like, what do you got to do? She's like, look, now I know how I'm going to update the decks. I'm going to create one deck, which is just the business onboarding deck, and one deck, which is the tech onboarding deck. I can't talk now. I got to go back to work. So she left actually like really excited about going back to doing these things that she probably was going to do anyway.
Right.
But she knew the destination. And once you know that, you're just, Jeff told me, he said, if you have a destination, if you know how you're going to measure your progress, you're just so much more likely to get there than if you just start hiking all around, you might end up with a waterfall. Who knows, right?
Isn't that interesting too that, we started talking about how, from the perspective of the listener, of the audience, how this makes more sense. But it also sounded like in your example, it helps the person who has to go away and do the work too, clarify what they're going to do next. It gives them more of a
Yes.
structure as well. And that seems very powerful.
It can be. And there's sort of a placebo effect almost of having an outsider to ask you this question, because I try to self-coach myself and I fail. I rely on somebody to say, like when I wrote my book, hey, what is the intended outcome of the book, right? And I'm so busy, I'm on chapter 4. What do you mean? I'm trying to finish chapter 4. Yeah,
Yeah.
but suppose that chapter 4 was great. Suppose chapter 5 was great. Suppose somebody read the book. Then what? How
Yeah.
is it, And I was like, wow, I never really thought about that. So here I am.
Exactly.
I'm the OKRs
Exactly.
coach, and I never even thought about why I'm writing the book. How will I know it's good? Anyway, it's pretty funny.
So I probably should have started with this question, and I think we sort of talked around it a bit, but some of our audience will be familiar with OKRs, and some of them will be hearing about it for the first time. So what does it stand for? What is it? Can you tell us, a bit
Absolutely.
of 101? And if you can carry through that mountain example, that would be great, because for me, that was an amazing visual.
Good. Well, OKRs is an acronym for objectives and key results. Now, the fine print is it could be MOKRS, MOKRs, we called it. That's how I learned it from Jeff Walker. And that was mission, objectives, and key results. So if you think of the mountain analogy, the mission would be the very top, and that will be a timeless statement, right? What, who is our customer? What is the impact we make? What is the service that we offer? And ultimately, what is our purpose or reason for existence? That's going to be your mission, and it's timeless. And then underneath that, you have your objectives. And your objectives are really, actually, Andy Grove, the founder of Intel, or not, he was the head of Intel at the time, he actually invents the term objectives and key results in the 1970s. And he thought of the objectives as the focus area, the direction that we're headed. I like to think of it as, where is the focus for improvement? Where do we want to focus our energy to move our organization, right? In the near term. So OKRs, objectives and key results, is typically looking out maybe up to a year. Typically, though, we're looking, key results are going to be looking out to a 2 to 3, maybe 4, maybe 6 months. So relatively short cycle. This is one of the beautiful things about OKRs, is that they go into that intermediate time frame, as opposed to like traditional budgeting or like 5-year plans. But they're also not like weekly, action items or action plans. So it's that 3-4 month kind of framework. That's usually where they're at. And so the objective is, where do we want to go? And it's a qualitative statement. And usually have 2 or 3 of these objectives in a company. You might even only have one. The idea is to have a small set of these objectives.
Okay.
And then you have your key results. The key results, and this is the hard part. This is why I have a job, right? Because key results are how do we know we've achieved the objective? How will we measure our progress against that objective? What are the milestones? What will we be able to point to at the end of the quarter, let's say, that says yes or no, did we achieve this toward our objective? And if we achieve all of the key results, then that means that we're on track with our objective. And those key results have to be measurable, right? So they can't just be subject to people's opinion. And that's really where you find that so many people, this is what I found, is so many people are hand wavers, meaning they come up with the objective, we're going to improve our customer experience, Really? Okay, great. What are the key results? Increase the net promoter score 20%, offer better product mix, roll out 5 new features, something like that. And it's like, wow, what if the features we roll out are not good? Like, that's not a really good key result. That's just roll out some features. I mean, what if the customers never use the features? Or what if they use them and then they cancel their subscription to your product because the feature's so bad? So
Right.
really the key results can't just be action items that we're going to do. And also, I gave you that example. I don't know if I got it right, but it's something like, increase the net promoter score 30% or customer satisfaction 30%. Okay, but what does that even mean? Increase it from X to Y over what period of time with what customer segment? And I don't know, like, are we even measuring it now? So I have lots of questions when I get into the key results. And this is where we get alignment. So the big advantage of OKRs is now we don't just have these hand-waving statements of like, move our product to the cloud, right? Great. Oh, yeah, that sounds great. But how will we know we've moved the product to the cloud? And what about the people that want to stay in the enterprise? And what about the fact that there's, these other issues? So we have these measurable statements, these key results. And now we all know that we're accountable, right? So the big advantages of OKRs, you got your alignment. I think I mentioned that. You got your focus because we have a small set of OKRs. And then you have accountability because we know, and the executive team stands up in front of the company and says, it's okay, we didn't achieve every one of our key results, but here's what we did achieve. You're not expected to hit every single thing, but it's supposed to drive learning. So at the end of the day, the OKRs model is pretty much a goal-setting framework. And I think of it also, though, as a verb, right? So it's not like you just write them down and you're done. You're actually asking a set of questions, right? You see, I was sort of doing that, right? Like, what is the intended outcome of the task? Or what is the most important area to focus to improve, right, in the near term? All of those types of questions are in the, quote, toolkit of the OKRs coach, and the OKRs coach is asking these questions all the time. So not just once a quarter or what have you, but then we're updating progress, and we have a formal way of doing that, right? Are we on track? What is our confidence? What is the blocker? What is the next step, right? Is the key result? Are we going to hit the stretch? Are we going to hit the commit? There's all this language that we use, but I could teach you everything. I've almost done it. If you gave me 2 hours, you would know everything you need to know in theory about OKRs.
That's amazing. Yeah, well, we're going to dive deeper into some issues and see, how they can be applied in our industry, which is architecture, engineering, construction. I started in engineering consulting about 10 years ago, and then After some time there, I ended up moving into tech startups. And that was actually the first time I heard about OKRs. It was in the context of, Google uses OKRs, you should use OKRs.
Yes,
But just an observation, it's possible that OKRs aren't as widely used in professional service organizations like civil and architectural firms. Is this something that you've observed as well? These are firms that, they talk a lot about billable hours, utilization rate, for example. Have you observed this?
absolutely. What I found is that many professional services style organizations that have, like you said, hourly rates, billable hours, utilization rates, whether that's utilization rates of people or in some cases, utilization rates of vehicles or heavy duty machinery. At the end of the day, most of these companies have a very stable set of metrics that they're tracking, and they're more or less operating as what I would call a business as usual approach. So they're at more or less steady state, which means, well, we're at 60 to 70% utilization rate of our, billable hours overall across the organization. Well, that's kind of where we want to be. And if it goes below 60%, well, wait a minute, do we need to get more work or do we need to get rid of people? And if it's going over 70%, what do we do? People are going to be overworked, right? So believe it or not, what you just said, yeah, I've actually done a lot of modeling in this industry and it's pretty much comes down to that. Now, there can be nuances, and I think the nuances are where the OKRs come in place. So let me clarify. OKRs will not be useful for everybody. I think that's a really important thing to just come out and say. If you're a company that is already operating at a steady state, like I mentioned, and things are kind of going along, like churning along, like business as usual, maybe you just have your goal is to just maintain the status quo. Let's keep going how we're going. So our objective is keep doing what we're doing. Our key results are we don't even need them because we already have metrics or KPIs, and we're just maintaining them in the healthy range. Now, I say that, but it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment because most organizations do have some kind of an area where they want to improve, right? So you might say, well, yeah, okay, sure. We're going along, we're cooking, whatever. But, we have an objective. We want to expand into a new product category, or we want to expand into a new region, or we want to expand to take on a new, state or building code, thing that we're doing. Or maybe we want to go through a merger, right? We want to merge with this other group or whatever. There's just different little things that can be happening. Maybe we want to get better at sales because we feel like our sales process is broken. I mentioned onboarding, right? It might be, hey, you know what? Our onboarding program, it could be better. So if there is something like that, and by the way, I'll make a distinction. The two types of objectives that an architectural engineering kind of construction organization would look at, there's two types, right? One of them is more your external objective. How can we deliver better value or make a better impact to our ultimate customer or outside of our organization? The other one will be how can we have a better objective? So an internal objective, how can we make our experience for our employees better? Whether that means, that we improve the culture, whether it means we have, let me give you another example. We're more efficient, right? Not to bring up the great Doge acronym here, but some of our clients in that space will say, we know we can be more efficient internally. So what does that look like? And that might even be multiple things, right? So it might be, well, we need to we have a key result around onboarding. We have a key result around winning new deals, faster or whatever. So we might have some efficiency metrics. Okay.
Yeah, and I think if you don't mind, can I just jump in? There's a few issues that I
Sure.
sort of noted that we can just highlight in the civil space. And then, the question is, can OKRs help with these? But for example, staffing issues, you started talking about it, but retention is a big issue in AEC, and there's actually a shortage of qualified engineers, for example. So making better use of your existing people, trying to upskill them in contrast with this overemphasis on billable hours, right? Like there's never enough time for
Yes.
training, but you need your people to be better. Inconsistent project delivery, siloed departments, slow to adopt new technologies. And as you said, also like getting into new market segments, new types of clients, and the business development investment that needs to go into your people and the actual strategy to get there. So
I
exactly
love
what
it.
you were saying. I just
I
wanted
love it.
to
Yeah,
elaborate a little bit.
let's dig into retention because retention
Yeah.
is such an important one, and especially in this industry that you're mentioning. These are highly skilled people. Hey, look, they can go get a job somewhere else. So, and your people are, well, they're especially if they've been around for a while, they become more and more valuable for the most part in your organization. So a lot of times you will see an objective around improve the retention. And that's some kind of an internal objective to make our experience for our employees better, which of course ultimately does drive the impact on the customers. But the focus for improvement is, let's say, on internal employee retention. And so I've seen so many organizations try to do this. I worked with one where they said, well, we're going to have to start offering one-on-ones every week with our boss, because that will improve retention. Well, it didn't work.
It sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, they added all these one-on-ones. Sure enough, they were doing one-on-ones. Like literally their key result. This is actually a really important problem to address with OKRs. OKRs, if done right, can be incredibly helpful. However, OKRs, if done wrong, can be not helpful. I mean, I guess that's probably like anything. It may be at best a waste of time. If the objective is improve retention and your key result is conduct one-on-ones with all staff, see, that's just a thing. You're going to go do that.
That's just a thing.
It's like I said with the launch 5 features. Let's go launch some features. Let's go do some stuff. What we have to ask isn't the question, what are we going to do in order to try to improve retention, but how will we know we've improved retention? The obvious key result would be improve retention rate from, 90% to 95%, whatever, put something like that, annual, whatever it is. That would be an easy one. But the other one, though, that I've seen is getting back into that one-on-one meeting thing. I had a client where they said, well, we have these one-on-one meetings. And I'm like, okay, well, are they good or bad? They all laughed. And, when people laugh, this wasn't funny. I'm like, oh, yeah, like if I was a comedian, I said, hey, do you have one-on-ones? It's just not funny. But there is something awkward going on. And usually that means there's an opportunity. So I said, well, why is this so funny? And they said, well, it's a dumb question. Are the one-on-ones good? I mean, some of them are good and some of them are bad. I said, really? Which are the ones that are good? And they said, well, the people that had the one-on-ones, not the bosses, but I said, well, let's not hear from the managers for a minute. Let's get you talking. The people that have had the one-on-ones, what was it that made it good? First of all, do you feel like they're good? Say, oh yeah, some of them are good, some of them are bad. Okay, what makes it good? What is the intended outcome of one-on-one? And it was really interesting. Almost everybody said, when I have my one-on-one, if I come out of there and I have my list of like 8 things I got to get done, right? If I can take one, even just one of those things, and my boss crosses it out and says, don't do that, that's not the priority, then that helps me focus on what I need to get done, because otherwise I feel overwhelmed. So we came up with a key result. I don't know, it was a baseline because we didn't know what it was. And this is a little trick, like a OKR cycle so short. So we had instead of saying have more one-on-ones, we said, at the end of the quarter, report a baseline metric that captures the percentage of one-on-one meetings that result in one or more items crossed off of the priority list. Now, when we have our one-on-one, the managers went into it. They're like, the first thing they said was, let me see what you have on your priority list. Like, we jumped right into that. Okay, tell me why this is important. Why do you want to do that? Okay, wait a minute. No. Bill's already working on that. You don't need to do that one. Cross it off your list. That's a win. And so it sounds simple, but all of a sudden that improved morale. Now, I don't think after they got that baseline, then they tried to improve it. Maybe a quarter or two into their year, they didn't have to worry about the one-on-ones. They were now at steady state. And so that's no longer a key result, but the objective for retention actually went for the full year. And then each quarter they would come up with some other little nuance of what could we do to improve our retention. And that forced them to have the discussion, right? So when you tell your employees, oh, it turns out retention is our number one priority, how can we do that? You're having a dialogue, and you're having it every quarter. And it's starting to work. We're starting to point to see now our one-on-ones. We know how to do that. We're listening to you. It can be incredibly transformative, and it's so simple, right? It's not a lot of work to do this.
It is simple, but I'm just thinking, like, would I have come to the same conclusion? There's a bit of creativity and there's a bit of dot connecting, and that's probably why it's good to have somebody on the outside take a look at it with fresh eyes, right? Because the default might just be do what you've always done, one-on-ones work, let's increase one-on-ones, but you're not really digging into, well, why do they work?
Well, and then let me get your time to deliver, because this is yet another internal one. And what happened was, this is another one. I'm going right back into this meeting. And in this case here, I think there was a group of engineers that were supposed to get the plans to the next group or something like that. I don't remember what it was. There's like a thing that's a deliverable from this group to that group, right? And of course, if it takes weeks, that's going to delay the process. We want it to take days or whatever the exact numbers were. And the one group, right, and the leadership team was all sort of bad-mouthing this one group, saying, well, it's always getting stuck. They're the bottleneck, blah, blah, blah. And the guy that was like, he was like looking around, and he was like, well, what do you mean? Like, he's like, what do you mean I'm the bottleneck? And they're like, oh, 80% of your stuff is late. No, it's more like 90%. People are just making up numbers. No, there was no data. So I said, okay, well, wait a minute. Do you have the data that shows what the dates are that you're supposed to deliver these things and which ones are? He says, yeah, I got that all in the system or whatever. I'm like, all right, well, he's like, I'll pull it up right now. And he's like, look, it's 85% is delivered on time. It's not 85% is delivered off time. And they were like, well, how can that be? And it turns out it was accurate, 85% delivered on time. But what was happening was when they looked at the ones that weren't delivered on time, they began to realize that a lot of those, like more than half of the ones that weren't delivered on time, were actually the essential ones. And so they just didn't have communication about this is so basic, right? They started having tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1, we need 100% delivered on time. Tier 2, if it's 80%, that's great. And now, quarter later, he's like, okay, well, why didn't you say so? And tier 1 was delivered way more on time. Instead of 50% of those tier 1s on time, it was now up to 80% after just like 3 or 4 months. So the conversation that the OKRs coaching can lead to, it kind of gets to the problem really quickly. What Jeff Walker, my mentor, said was, you have to find the pain or wherever it's bleeding or whatever, and then you just apply pressure and you just keep applying pressure. And it's like, once you apply the pressure on the pain and you keep doing it, then it's gone. It was some kind of an analogy like
that's
that.
Good. Yeah. And you know what? You said before, business as usual. I think even for myself at times, it's really easy to just get into the routines. But in some ways, these frameworks are pattern breakers, which is what is needed, right? Because patterns are comfortable, but sometimes the new pattern is going to really help you achieve.
That's a really good point. It forces you to step back. In fact, in my definition of OKRs, I say it's a critical thinking framework, meaning instead of just doing stuff, right? Like, let's take a step back and ask some basic questions and then kind of reframe. And the idea is that you have to keep doing that over and over again throughout the year. It's not like we just do an annual retreat. Everybody gets excited. We write all these things down, wow, that was cool. Then we go back to work and we go right into our habits. The OKRs, critical thinking, critical questioning, you're doing that on an ongoing basis. And that's really the value I see with OKRs.
Yeah, great. Well, I remember being a junior in an engineering company and, learning about timesheets and billable hours and seeing these targets, 100%, you got to hit 100% and then doing your performance reviews. It felt like there was so much pressure on the individual, which makes sense. This is a business where we sell our personal services. My question is OKRs another way to measure individual performance, or how should
Yeah,
I know that you talk a little bit
question.
about this. Is it just another thing that's going to make me feel personally guilty or responsible for,
Yeah, it's actually a really important question. So if you go back to Google, short answer, no, we should not use OKRs to measure individual performance. I should always start with the answer to the question. But let me break that down for you. It turns out that in 2014, right, Google actually came out and said, look, we do OKRs. They did a video that was like an hour and a half or so. And it really set the tone for here's how you do OKRs. And what they said was you have OKRs at the company level, the team level, and then the individual level. And that's how they did it. And by the way, they also said, but we don't use OKRs for performance management. Well, but the irony was, if I talked to a bunch of people at Google, and in fact, they did use OKRs for performance management, which is odd, right, to say that we don't. What they meant was it's not the only thing that we do, but it's like half. It was like half of our performance management is OKRs, but there's another half. So anyway, without getting too technical, because Google had started with OKRs at the individual person level, and that's what worked for them, as they grew, they continued to do that. However, in talking with some people at Google, they said, oh yeah, that's what we did, but we would actually not recommend that other companies set OKRs at the individual person level. It creates problems because those individual level OKRs start to look a lot more like tasks, right? Or like things I got to get done. And while there's a somewhat famous story, at least to me, it's famous. It's probably not famous to very many people, but back when Twitter was called Twitter, they used to have some OKRs in their early stage. And the reason why I say it's famous, I think this really illustrates the point. They had company, team, and individual OKRs. And I remember this one time, all the individuals in a couple of the teams, like every individual achieved their OKRs, but none of the teams achieved their OKRs. It was like individuals achieved like 90% of their key results. The teams achieved like 20% of their key results. So it was like, wow, what's the disconnect? And the CEO came and said, I don't want this anymore. I don't care about any of those individual OKRs. That's just a bunch of hoopla. The team OKRs are what are feeding into the company. I care about those, and you're not achieving those. So throw out the individual ones. And the reason why that was important was it's the CYA mentality. I talked to the people, they're like, well, if I have individual OKRs and there's team OKRs, at the end of the day, I'm going to focus on my individual ones. I don't want to look bad. So if you do have individual OKRs, whether you want to or not, you're going to be using OKRs as part of your performance review. And we found that this violates so many of the basic principles of OKRs, which is really we want to have alignment. We want to have collaboration, so we're working together. Part of my definition includes working together to make measurable progress on the most important goals. And like we saw with Twitter, when the individuals are doing their thing, they're kind of working on their own things so that they don't look bad in front of their boss, which is a whole different deal as compared to working together to achieve our most important goals, which are going to be higher level shared goals at the team level.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's a good segue into the next question, which I'd like to know about what are some of the biggest misconceptions and common pitfalls that organizations face when they're trying to implement structured frameworks like
Boy,
OKRs.
and this is the good news, bad news, because I work with organizations, obviously, that have probably, for the most part, tried to implement OKRs and failed. And that's why they call me. So I want to say shout out to all of you who are out there who did OKRs and didn't call me and didn't fail, but I don't know who you are, right? So if you're on this call and you're doing OKRs and it's working really well and you don't want help, just give me a call and let me know so that and you can tell me how you dealt, but you didn't have any pitfalls. Because I think I have a bias because, of course, I only talk to the people that have run into these pitfalls. But the most common pitfalls, by the way, this is all in my book. If anybody's really going to do OKRs, you got to get this book, the OKRs Field Book. But the key ones are, number one on my list is too many OKRs. I love this story. I had this one client that said, we're going to use OKRs. I'm like, okay, why do you want to use OKRs? What is the problem you're trying to solve? We don't focus very well. We just have too many things going on. There's new things coming in. People are overwhelmed. Okay, well, let me see your OKRs. Thousands of OKRs. So I'm sitting here going, well, okay, isn't it ironic that you're telling me you want to use OKRs to focus and yet you have thousands of OKRs? And like, yeah, we were kind of thinking that too. And I said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to try something new. We're going to have one. And it's really interesting. Like as an OKR coach, I sometimes I do this. It's a little bit of a power trip, but I'm like, what if for this next quarter, we just have one OKR and that's it? We can always add more. But rather than subtracting, let's just rebuild and go with one. And it worked out really well. So the most common pitfall is too many OKRs. The second most common one is low quality, right? Where the key results often just look like a to-do list. Like we said, like launch 5 features, update the onboarding deck, right? Whatever that is, send out the customer satisfaction survey. I actually saw, this is my favorite key result. I'm going to say this publicly. This is definitely the worst key result I've ever seen in my life. And I hope that this person isn't listening to this session. They probably aren't because it was a long time ago. But their key result, get this, bring flowers to the new employee reception. That's the key result. Wow. I saw it in the, I was like, wow. I mean, that is not a key result. I mean, that's just like something you're going to do today, right?
Yeah.
So at least if you're going to put in a task, right, make it be like a project that's like, update the patch on the security software or something that's going to take some work. At least make it look like that. Anyway, so key results that look like a to-do list is the number 2 big mistake. The number 3 one is what we call set it and forget it. So this is where, and again, full disclosure, when I first started, I actually did an audit and about half of my clients were actually failing here. It's sort of embarrassing, right? I would define the OKRs. We'd have a small number. We'd have high quality OKRs, but then we'd have to make progress on the OKRs. And the idea was we're going to check in maybe every month or bi-weekly or whatever cadence we had. Some people even tried to do weekly cadences to check in. And I would say, okay, I'm going to come in and do a check-in session with you to make sure you're doing it. And I did that about half the time. Then I went back and looked at the teams where I didn't check in. And I said, so how did your check-in go? They said, what are you talking about? We didn't check in. And I was like, well, didn't you go to the training where I said you're supposed to check in? How that's really important? I even told them that that's a pitfall. And what it means is, it's kind of like our New Year's resolutions. We write them all down. For those of us that did that, can anyone really remember? Like we're in April now. Can anybody remember their New Year's resolutions? Something about losing weight, right? Well, yeah. Anyway, my point is, you have to meet up and talk about this on a continued structured way, at least once. I found even if you just do one mid-cycle check-in to talk about your OKRs, where you are, and give an update, even just one time in the middle of the cycle can go a long way. So those are the 3 most common pitfalls. There's some others, but boy, those 3 tend to really get people.
Okay, that's good to know. And we talked about this is not for individuals necessarily, though historically it might have been
you might have just gotten the number 4 problem, which is when you write individual level OKRs. And that also goes back to too many OKRs because, boy, right. Once you do that, they're everywhere.
So, we're talking about teams here. We're talking about, organizations. Now, culture can play a big part into the success of OKR adoption and achieving, what you're trying to
Huge.
achieve. Can you talk a little bit about that? What would an organization, especially, professional service organization, look like if they're in the right spot culture-wise to adopt
Yeah.
this model?
Well, okay. So when I said earlier, like, well, we are a focused culture or whatever, and then I look at your OKRs and there's too many. What I would say, it's a chicken and the egg thing, right? Your OKRs reflect your culture, but also your OKRs inform your culture, right? So that's what I mean by, well, maybe chicken and the egg isn't the right way to go. It's a mutually self-fulfilling prophecy or whatever. They're A and impacts B and B impacts A. So it's like a loop like that. And what I would say is, I'll take an example of a learning organization. So a lot of companies I work with say, oh, we're a learning organization. Okay. That's part of our culture. We're a learning organization. I say, okay, how do we know you're a learning organization? Like, what do you mean? Like, what makes you a learning organization? And they say, oh, look, 90% of our employees complete this continuing education thing and they do these training workshops and all that. I said, okay, interesting. So that's different than what I thought of when you said learning organization, because I thought you meant that we learn about how to work better and we learn about how to, whether that's how to help our customers or whether how to work better internally or whatever. Like we're learning how to do things as we go, as opposed to we attend courses that are supposed to train us on some kind of a skill or whatever. Individual people are learning skills or something. That's great. And then we started talking about it. And what ended up happening was we looked at their OKRs process, and now, because then they said, well, we want to be a better learning organization. Their objective was to be a better learning organization. We want a culture that's more focused on learning, and this became something that resonated with the people, because it was like they were giving lip service. You find this a lot, right? We're a culture of inclusivity, really. Well, then how come, the entire leadership team is all male? It's like, time out. That sort of seems weird. So when you say things like our culture is this way, they call it the espoused theory versus the theory in use, right? For those of us that studied like industrial psychology. And the espoused theory is what we say we're going to do, right? It's the explicit, this is what we say. And then the implicit, or the theory and uses, but our behavior shows us that this is really what our values are. This is what our real culture is based on our you can derive that based on behavior.
Actions
So what
speak
we
louder
did,
than words, in other way. In other ways.
exactly. So
Other
what we
words.
did was, at the end of each cycle, we had a sit down, reflect, and reset, where we said, okay, every key result, what did we learn from working on this key result? We documented it. We talked about it. And then we said, how do we apply that learning into the next OKR cycle? Is there a new key result that we can have that's going to be informed based on that? And I'll never forget this one. It was an insurance company, actually. So they had to sell a certain number of insurance premiums. They had to get partners. And they ended up getting lots of partners. But then those partners didn't sell the insurance. So it was like not a good key result. What we learned was, don't just get lots of partners. I mean, even though the partners paid like $1,000 in order to be a partner, you thought, oh, okay, well, then they'll probably sell the insurance. But they didn't. It was get better partners, right? Get quality partners. And what does that mean? And they found out that if you sold 3 of these insurance premiums in the first month, you're probably going to keep selling them. So it was have a small increase in the number of partners that sell 3 in their first month. And now it focused them on what they needed to do. But see, they were applying the learning. And so that can become part of the culture. So the OKRs model, I think, can be used as sort of a little knob that you can twist and turn and sort of impact your culture. But also, when I start working with somebody, the way that we try to do OKRs often affects the culture. For example, I had one say, we want to use OKRs for more alignment. But what they did was they had me work with every single department in the org chart as a silo. Like I had to work with this department, then this department, then this department. And the departments were complaining to me, well, how can we do this? We need to be working on our OKRs with this other department. And so finally, I had to go to the CEO and said, we're doing it wrong. If we want to do OKRs for alignment, we need cross-functional teams. We need to take like sales and marketing, put them in one room, product and engineering, put them in one room, HR and finance, put them in one room, right? And now we'll have a smaller number of OKRs and they'll be more aligned. And it was like, wow, that's brilliant. So we were able to use OKRs to kind of create more of that cross-functional collaboration. That's probably a bit of a lengthy answer, but you can see that it's a good question, and there's lots of ways you can play with culture and OKRs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I was going to ask for, maybe a bit more on any real world examples you can share. You've shared some examples generally, but maybe any case studies that you can help to show us how an organization has successfully implemented the framework and what impact it had.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've written a book, the OKRs Field Book, and I want to have in my next version sort of 10 one-pagers where it's specifically, here is the OKR they came up with, and here is the impact that they had. And I've kind of I've alluded to some of these stories. For the most part, they're fairly small, but I will give you one example. I can't remember the exact client, but what happened was they had an impending event. So this might be useful to you if you're in the construction engineering, kind of space. In their case, though, their impending event was literally their annual conference, right? Where all the different vendors, they were selling something online, some kind of, Pokemon cards or something like that. All kinds of collectible cards except baseball cards. So I was not interested because I'm only interested in baseball cards. So whatever. Probably Magic the Gathering or something, right? Collectible cards. But they were helping other small, mom and pop shops create storefronts. And so this was becoming like the number one place to go to get these cards online. It was surpassing eBay and all that. And the CEO was doing OKRs and it wasn't really working so well. So they called me up. And I said, well, what's the big objective? Like, where do we want to focus on improving? He says, well, we got to do this, we got to do that. And I said, well, it doesn't sound like he's like, well, the problem is that we have this annual conference, but it's in like 7 months. And the OKR cycle is in every 3 months. And I said, well, let's make it be in 7 months. Like, let's make that be the objective what is this thing? Is it the annual conference? Okay, make the annual conference a success. That was the objective. Now, we all said why it's important. We all agree. But how will we know that the annual conference is a success? And he said, well, when we go, we just feel like it. We get off the plane and we just feel like it's a success. And eventually I said, well, have you ever gotten on the plane? Let's talk about the specifics. He's like, well, there's some things that need to happen. Like, we have to do, in this case here, we have to do like 50 demos or something with these people of our new feature set, which allows them to post their stores using this new self-automated tool or something. I said, okay, well, so do you already have the self-automated tool? He said, that's the problem. We don't even have this thing. And I'm trying to, okay, well, let's make a key result be complete the first 50 demos and get initial feedback on this new thing at the thing. So anyway, we started writing down what the key results were. The point I'm making is then when the CEO went to speak to the organization, he himself was absolutely clear on what it needed to be. And the leadership team had developed these key results. And everyone in the organization was like, for the first time, okay, in 7 months, this is what to do. They were then able to break down their quarterly version of the OKR. What does it look like to be on track in order? So they worked backwards. And they ended up having this tremendous annual conference. And I remember the CEO called me afterwards and he said, we didn't even hit all of our key results. But the fact that we had that kind of like the destination, right? The fact that we knew this is where we want to be. And so the key takeaway here is don't be a victim of the system, right? He was thinking, well, the OKR system is every 3 months or every 6 months, but what if this event is 7 months out? What do I do? I'm like, let's make that be, this cycle
Right.
can be 7 months
Yeah.
out. So if you have an impending event and you know it's coming, right? Rather than being like, oh God, that thing's coming and we want to make it a hit, just make that be your objective, right? And then start align on how we will know that we're actually on track to hit that. And some of the key results might be shorter than 7 months in that example. You might say, well, let's do a check-in in 3 or 4 months. But that's the kind of thinking that has really been effective with OKRs where it really does make an impact.
That makes sense. Yeah, there's some room for flexibility. As you're talking, I'm finding myself daydreaming in a good way about how I'm going to use OKRs now in my business. And, as the leader of the business, I'm thinking a lot about, well, what's my role in making sure that this is successful? Say I'm the one at the top level, bringing up the conversation, facilitating the decisions around what OKRs will be adopted. What else
Right.
can I do to ensure that our goals are met and that we're successful?
Yeah. So what I would say here is you need, especially with a small mid-sized company, you need to have the leadership team bought in. So you want to start OKRs at the top level. So you want to get the leadership team together and develop top level OKRs. And it's important that the leadership team is all behind this. Like, so there's not like one executive sponsor. It's like, oh, the CEO wants to do it, but the CFO doesn't. And the best way to do that is to just do it. I, of course, recommend you hire me, right? Because I'll come in and be the external coach and I'll help you out. But even if you do it internally, you can do it yourself. In that case, you can probably just like look at my book and, you can figure it out. But what I would say is you need somebody to be what I call the OKRs project lead. And that person is the one that knows the answers to all these basic questions. Because and you'll see this in my OKRs field book, it's designed for you, the OKRs project lead. Like you have to start by answering the question, why are we doing OKRs? You can't just start doing, like whatever you do, don't just do OKRs in your organization. Come up with the problem we're trying to solve. Are we trying to improve alignment? Are we trying to get better focus? Are we trying to get better execution? What is it we're doing? Better communication, better learning. There's actually a number of things you can choose, but my advice is choose one, right? If you choose all of them, it doesn't really make any sense. But if you say we're going to try to use OKRs to drive focus, or we're going to try to use OKRs to drive alignment, maybe you can choose two. Small number of those is better. Then now you're going to start asking yourself these basic questions, right? What is the length of the OKR cycle? Should it be 7 months, like in my example there? Or should it be 3 months? The default is 3 months, so you might start with that. But again, 4 months seems to be the new default. Maybe 6 months if you're a company with construction where projects take whatever seems like a relatively short period of time. And if 3 months is too short, maybe make it 4 or 6 months. Sometimes the first cycle, there's two arguments. Some people say do a super rapid, shorter cycle, and other people say do a longer cycle. I found longer cycles better because what happens is you're still learning how to do this. And to get key results, like by the end of the month, they're just going to look more like activities. So if you can give yourself a little bit more time, it makes it feel more possible to actually move the needle and hit a key result.
Okay.
So you want to have those rules of the road and have an OKR drafting template, right, designed. So it says, here's the objective, here's why, the key results will be achieved as measured by this date, fill in the blank. So before you do your training workshop or your OKRs workshop with your team to set those OKRs, basically get prepared. Okay, and that's what I call the deployment parameters. Hey, you engineers out there, I was an engineer too. So you have to have the answers to those types of questions. Like how many OKRs will we have? If we're going to only have one, maybe we go into this and say, we're going to try OKRs. Guess what? We only get one. We're not trying to get a lot of work in here, but what's the number one objective? Have every executive write down what they think is the top objective and then discuss, get your Post-its out. They're going to love it. I found that these leadership teams love it. You get at least one of these, they're going to love it. If you try to do, 2 or 3 and it's not really adding value, they might eventually burn out. But if you are somebody that's like a chief of staff or an agile coach or somebody that has access to the leadership team, or you're a leader yourself, I highly recommend you try to do an OKR development session with your leadership team.
Okay, great. Personally, I love Post-its, dry erase markers, pizza, the whole thing about the session. It can be really fun to hear other people's ideas and dive into this. It's a bit of a break from the normal routine.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll give you though, as far as the energy in the room goes, this is like a little bit of an operational detail, but it's really important. When you have them all write down their objective, that's great. Don't just have them post it quite yet. Have them talk to their neighbor. So, working in groups of 2, and then have each group of 2 try to align on just one objective. Say if you were a group of 2 and you could only pick one objective, what would it be? And then that way you're going to have less Post-its on the initial board. And you want to, you want to get it down to like 2 or 3. And then, yeah, exactly.
These
and then
are the
also,
tips we need.
Those are the insider tips. Exactly.
Yeah, good. So, this is an industry that traditionally, architects, engineering, construction firms, we've relied on a lot of technology. That said, things are changing pretty rapidly now, especially with AI, and companies are really thinking about how they can transform their businesses with tech in a whole new way.
Yeah.
Would this be a good time for them to also think about how to rethink how they set goals, considering, these broader shifts in the business?
I think so, because a lot of my clients who are maybe my older clients are coming back and saying, hey, let's do an AI workshop because we want to think about how could we leverage AI, in our OKRs. And I'm like, okay, at first I'm kind of like, wait, I don't get that. What AI is just like some kind of software tool or whatever. Like, what do you mean, how are we going to leverage AI in our OKR? But what it was a prompt to take a step back. And because there are so dynamics, I mean, what you're saying, let me translate to what I think you're saying. Hey, guess what? AECs, or whoever you are out there, guess what? Things are changing. So if you are business as usual, if you want to still be business as usual in 5 years, okay, you're going to need to start developing the skill to adapt to the changing times because, we've known this for a long time. You can go back to AutoCAD, right? AutoCAD was a big change. But it seems like if you graph it, it was like AutoCAD. Okay, 10 years later, then it was something else. 5 years later, it was something else. Now it's like every year there's something brand new that's coming out and changing things and impacting things. So
exactly, yeah.
Developing the skill to the critical thinking, right, to get those OKRs in place and be able to pivot, have conversations in a way that gets you more focused on the outcomes as opposed to just, oh my God, we got to do this, we got to do that. I think now it's probably more important than ever to do just that, develop those skills.
Okay. And finally, what piece of advice can you give to AEC leaders looking to improve goal setting and performance in their organization? Any last thing that we haven't talked about yet that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, what I would give you is, even if you're not going to do OKRs, because I think probably most of you will choose to not do OKRs formally, and that's fine, but I would challenge you, okay, this is my piece of advice that I would really challenge you to do, which is to think about some project, something that you're doing, whether it's posting blogs or whether it's, I don't know, launching features for hiring people, whatever it is, some activity that you kind of do. And I want you to challenge yourself, especially if it's, cost intensive or whatever, and say, what is the intended outcome of that? That one thing. What is that one thing that we're doing that we keep doing over and over again? What is the intended outcome? In other words, how we measure progress. So the example I gave you with features, right? That don't just launch 5 features. Ask yourself the question of what is the intended outcome of that feature or those features. Ask yourself, what is the intended outcome of posting those blogs? What is the intended outcome of hiring those people? So that or what is the intended outcome of streamlining onboarding or, updating the onboarding deck? All those examples I gave you. You don't have to necessarily do OKRs formally, right? To come up with just that one key result that you can point to, that's a measurable statement that is creative. Like I think we were talking about that, right, Rebecca? Something kind of creative that's based on your experience at work, and try to figure that out and then put that up there, whether it's a post-it or whatever, or send it to some people that are going to work on it, and try to introduce that into your leadership presentation. So when you talk, instead of only talking about big level goals or, hey, we need to be better at dealing with AI and all this kind of stuff, give them that one thing. We're going to try to improve this metric, right? Or we're going to try to move the needle here. And it's ultimately, that's how we know we're going to be moving us toward our strategy. Just that one key result. I found that can go a long way toward, driving the focus alignment and giving you some of the, maybe not all of the benefits of OKRs, but maybe giving you a little bit of that with very limited time and effort. And in fact, on that note, anyone listening to this, I'm happy to do like a 15 to 30 minute power session, right? Where, you'll just have to figure out how to contact me and just say, hey, I listened to the end of this podcast. And if you're an AEC person and you want to just do a power session, we'll just come up with that one key result and I'll work with you to do that, because it can be really useful to have somebody to bounce the idea off. So that's your challenge. And that's me saying you got no excuses because it's free and it's only 15 or 20 maybe minutes. I mean, let's go. Let's see who's out there who's ready to do that.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for that offer. And I'm sure there will be people out there who definitely take you up on that. That's very generous. And I've enjoyed this conversation so much. This has been fantastic. Thank you for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Take care. Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at aecleadershippodcast.com. There you'll find a summary of the key points that we discussed in today's episode and links to any of the resources, books, websites, and anything else relevant mentioned during this episode.